everyone, this is Meg at Chasing Retro. Today I am going to do one of the Ready, Set, Stash challenges that I have put together for all of you to participate in if you would like. Today I thought I would show you the sewing ephemera that I've been working on. That was one of the things that I really wanted to do, to mass make. I ended up deciding to make some sewing journals, so I'm not sure how much I will have left after the completion of those. We'll see. I'm trying to make a few extra as I go. So this prompt that I'm doing today is actually on the first month that we did this collaboration in September. I am really behind, as you can see, and I never really did intend to set out to do all of these myself in 3 months, but this one was just one of the ones that I was really looking forward to and kept putting it off because I was trying to finish other projects. But I wanted to show you some things that I have made with sewing notions, as well as sewing themed book pages and magazines and such. One of the first things that I made was a series of small journals to go in the journals. It's funny how we do that, isn't it? These are just covers made from cardstock. And then I have taken some button cards, snap fastener cards, things like that, that were in pretty rough shape. I saved the ones in the most rough shape for this project. Like this one right here, someone had punched out the little things and the cardboard was pretty much obliterated. And as you can see, here there was a big hole, so I patched it with a piece of sewing instruction, and then I just did a little bit of layering, collaging, whatever. To get the blister pack off, I used a craft knife and I held the card like this, and I just ran the craft knife along the edge to take off the blister part. And it did leave the plastic on that's glued down, as you can see, but if you pull that up, it will take off the printing with it. So I prefer to leave it like this, and it's okay if it's shiny, but you may have to go through and file down a little bit more with your craft knife because there may be some sharp edges, but it's just a great way to preserve as much as you can of the image and the beautiful graphics that they used to put on these notions. But yeah, it's just little sheets of leftover scraps, and here's a sewing pattern instruction sheet. And then I usually, if I put 5 pages or less, my sewing machine will easily sew down the center. I know some people staple them, and that's also a great idea. And you can also run a string through it and tie a bow. Here's another one. This one is a snap fastener, and then I've got a little sewing pattern lady here. Okay, this one is the only one of these that is not cardstock as the cover. This one was actually it was a package that was stapled and then had like the plastic bag hanging down with the hem gauge in it. So I just saved the top part of it and rounded the corners. I like to round the corners of my mini notebooks. I added some fabric and a sewing pattern lady, so you can still see the hole where it was hung on a rack. Really fun little notebook. Here's another cardstock one. This one's pretty simple. Another cardstock one. This one was really beat up, so I had to sort of play around with it. This is one of the sewing pattern stickers that I have that are vellum, and so she's a little bit translucent. And then I put some fabric here. And the last one is another snap card and fabric. This is from I think it was a vintage reproduction pattern. So I just cut her out and put her on here. This is the tallest one, I think, of the ones that I have. Really fun paper from Hobby Lobby. It's sort of a hippie theme. So I'm using a lot of these papers in these sewing journals. The next thing is I have a couple of sewing counter catalogs that I was sent in Happy Mail, and I have been using them slowly. I don't want to go through them too fast. And I've been using them as pages in journals, but also occasionally I will get brave and I'll cut one of the ladies out. And that's what I've done with these. These are all very large, tall sewing counter catalog models. Some of them had, you know, went all the way down and had feet, and I cut those off. Some of them, like, well, you'll see in a minute. Some of them had, they stopped at the shirt because maybe the pattern was for a top. So that made it a little bit easier for me to justify, because I didn't have to cut part of the image off. But I just backed it onto cardstock, also from Hobby Lobby from a couple years ago, that looks like paint splatter, and it's variegated or graduated coloring. And then I put some fabric around, and I sewed around the ladies for visual interest, but also just to make sure they didn't lift up. Here's a very pink one. She was standing next to someone else on this side and this side, so I kind of camouflaged it by making this hand go off the card and putting a piece of fabric here. She looks very fallish, I think. Here's one of the ones that was advertising a top. She looks like my piano teacher when I was 7. Okay, these are not the same. I just grabbed them. These are also on the same splatter, but this is the cover flap of the patterns that you used to be able to order from Workbasket or Mary and Martin and things like that. They're very thin, almost newspaper-like, so I had to be really careful taking them off, cutting them out rather. And I glued them down with the glue stick, and then I used variegated thread to go around the outside in a zigzag. And then I took some of my trims, some of them are vintage, some are not, and I just glued a little interest of trim in the corner. I'm missing one of these. I'm sure I'll find it in here, but yeah, I had 5. Oh, here it is. Here it is. This one frayed a little bit at the top, so I glued a little bow just to camouflage that. All right. Next, shaker cards. I went through and I picked the sewing notions that I had windows, and well, a couple of them didn't have a window, but I created one. But the ones that are easy to do for this project already have windows. Now, I cannot take credit for this. This was an idea that I got from Wishes and Weeds. I'll link her channel in my description box. She did this a couple of years ago with sewing notions, and hers turned out amazing. She ended up embellishing most of them with sewing pattern ladies, but I decided not to with these because I didn't want to cover up any of the beautiful words and colors. But that's up to you. You're welcome to do that if you do this. But it allows you to keep the back if you would like, or if you want this to be a journaling card, you can always put some cardstock or colored paper on the back. But I just wanted to leave it like this. If the journal, if the new journal owner wants to add something on the back for writing, they can. Here's another one. This one has tinier windows. This is a needle envelope. And I just, these sort of opened up like this and then folded out. So after I got this situated and got the acetate back in, I sewed around this part to keep the sequins from going all the way up and getting lost in here. And then I closed, actually I glued the flaps together before I did that, and then I sewed around this. And sometimes, some of these I go around the whole thing too, but on this one I only did the square. Here's another needle one, and this one has a little more room for some reason, but I really like the pink. And then this is a very old needle pack. This is from an estate sale that I went to, and a lot of the sewing notions at this estate sale were from the 20s and 30s. So really cool. And I actually have some, I bought some star glitter, or maybe it's table scatter, and I used that. I bought that recently at my craft reuse store. This is some, these have butterflies in them. I got this on clearance at Hobby Lobby. It was in their resin supply department on clearance. So this one is a pink and orange and yellow theme, which is, you'll know I love those colors together. And last but not least, this one was not a card with a window. I had to make this. So it had a cutout, but then it had some bands here because the strap kind of wove up and over it. And that's how it was secured to the package. So I just cut that out and created a window using acetate. You guys may have remembered I told y'all that I started buying the cake acetate that you can get on Amazon that wrap around cakes. Much cheaper and more economical than buying it in a craft store. So I really thought this one was fun too. And I did back this one with cardstock so you could journal. Next up, all those little offcut strips that you have when you have to trim a page an inch, a half an inch to fit into a journal. I save all of those strips in a shoebox tote, and I use them to make Franken paper, but here's another way that I use them. I have taken some really pretty floral printed ones, and I have just sort of experimented with the sewing stitches on my sewing machine. And I used black thread, which I thought looked really cool on the bright colored florals. And I just went through and did a variety of different patterns. And I can use these as is along the edge of a page, glue it down, or I can cut it into pieces and just use it as decoration here and there. This one was a really fun stitch. I love this. I don't know what its name is, but this is pretty cool. This one I think is, I don't know if it's leaves or bows, but I had the stitch a little too close together. As you can see, it sort of skipped when I started going fast. It did good when I was going slow, but when I started going fast, it was having trouble. This one is the same. You can just tell I had the stitches a little too close together. So you have to be careful when you sew on paper not to have your stitch too close together. It's not fabric, and if you have it too close together, when you're done, it will completely separate and like punch out. That's something that I had to learn the hard way. Of course, I had to make some ruffles. These are just offcut sewing strip scraps that I had in a box. I keep sewing strips in a box too, just ready for making ruffles at any moment's notice. And I just made a variety of colors that will match these journals, kind of 70s colors, and they're ready to decorate with. Next, I made some fabric snippets. This is from my big box of fabric scraps, and I just picked them up and layered them. I really don't think I'm very good at making clusters. I don't know why. It's just a struggle for me. I have some that people have made for me and given me, and I like theirs so much better. But I cannot put my finger on what I am lacking in mine. If y'all have any ideas or tips, let me know. But I thought these were fun color combos. Next, I have some paper clusters, and these are pretty much all Sewing Notion discards. So I have a vintage measuring tape that I've been cutting up into segments. I have a ton of these little zipper tags. This is, as you know, is just sewing pattern tissue. And this, if I found handwriting on a pattern, I cut it out and I use those in these snippets. The base is a piece of like a offcut of file folder with a little piece of decorative paper on top. Here's another one. This is file folder, and this is actually a sewing pattern counter catalog page. It's a Vogue. You can see the word under there. And then there's a little thread spool label that I peeled off, and this is part of a trim package. Some of them I did put fabric on. This is, you'll see this in a moment. This is something that I made to make belly bands out of, and this was an offcut. And then the back of a pattern, and then the front label of a pattern. This one is, as you can see, someone had ripped apart a Sewing Notion package to get to what was inside, but the pieces were all still in the sewing basket that I bought at the estate sale. So I've been using those a little at a time. It was marked down to from $49 to $25, so it must have been a clearance item. This is actually from a paper pack, and I used it as a base, and then I layered some similar colored items on top. Here's another one of those offcuts here. This is from a very, very, very old package of twill tape, probably from the 20s because it came from that estate sale. Here's another handwritten piece. It says make long sleeves if enough material, and I just love saving things like that. Here's another handwritten piece. Someone had done some measuring and some figuring. This is from KB and Friends, this little tag. And here's another. This was like on one of those little note cubes that you rip off. Someone had written fabric scraps, probably just to label a box with, and I saved it because I love it, and it's pink and it's handwritten, and I layered some fun things on top. Just to show you, don't throw away anything, especially handwritten elements. Just put them in a box. You'll find a use for them. Here are some altered button cards. Made little fabric clusters and actually sewed buttons to them, which I don't often take the time to do, but I wanted to do one for each journal. And these are images cut out of Mary Martin or Work Basket pattern ads in Work Basket magazines. If you have those magazines, you'll know what I'm talking about. They always have the brightly colored border. And I just put a little square of paper on the back, nothing fancy, just as a place to journal. I didn't want to go crazy and stitch around the outside because these are already so delicate and tiny. This was a really cool one. This was from that very old antique sale. It was estate sale. It was bone rings. They were all, I kept them, but they were all very darkly discolored. They were no longer white. So, but the cardboard that they came on was very cool. It's almost like an index card divider, and it's the satiny smooth paper product. Here are some flip tags made with the offcuts of the paper that I used for the pages. These are 12 by 12 offcuts. So when I do a journal that's 9 by 8.5 by whatever, I usually have 3.5 inch offcut strip from a 12 by 12 sheet. So it makes wonderful tag flips. And I just did some layering with some, these are all ladies that are cut out of a sewing pattern envelope that was too destroyed to make into a journal cover at some point. So I just went through and cut and salvaged all these ladies a few weeks ago. These all flip up, and I sewed a little strip of fabric just to the top layer so it would still flip. Next, I have some fussy cut sewing pattern models that are from Work Basket magazine covers for the most part. I thought these would just be fun shaped journaling cards. So I backed them on manila folder, and they will just tuck into pockets and things. Really fun use of images that are real ladies, but maybe have an uncomplicated background that you can separate out. Really great way to use these pages in your magazines. If you have ribbon spools, you can use them as tuck spots. So these are pretty well loved, but I inked around the edges, and I'll be gluing these in the journal, you know, through here like an L shape so that I can use them as a tuck spot. I don't know that I'm going to embellish them anymore. I kind of like just the way they are, but you can certainly add a trim around it or put a cluster here. I turned some Work Basket pages into envelopes. So as you can see, unfolded, this is a full page, and I loved the entire image on one side of the page, but I didn't really care for the other side. Maybe it wasn't sewing themed or whatever. So I glued a piece of thin scrapbook paper, not cardstock, just the thin scrapbook paper to the other side. And then I rounded all the corners, folded it up, and sewed to create an envelope. So now you have a little place to store things. You could glue this down onto a page like this and just have a place, or you can attach it with a paper clip. You can also add the little circles with the strings that some people do. I thought that would be really cute as well. Here's another one. See, if you glue this down, you'll lose you'll lose all of this. So I'm thinking that for these journals, I'm gonna leave these free floating. This was a pattern for a pin cushion. And cut work rows, pot holders, needlework. So these journals are sewing themed, but I'm having some knitting and needlework elements in them as well. This is an advertisement for a new Elna sewing machine. And a dress form that you could order. Here are some pockets. These are very basic, self-explained. These are just index cards that I have turned onto the back where there are no lines, and I just glued down some sewing pattern tissue. If I felt like the design was too sparse after gluing it down, I would rip another piece and sort of collage it onto the top. Then I sewed everything down and inked the edges. So these are just basic. You could also go back and add a cluster or sewing, I need to glue this little thing down, or a sewing pattern lady or something like that if you wanted to, but you don't have to because they're pretty interesting just by themselves. It's a great way to use sewing pattern tissue. You could easily mass make these, and these would go in, they don't have to go in just sewing journals, they could go in a collected journal also. Here are some more pockets. These are pages from a Simplicity sewing book. They were pretty tall pages, so I was able to rip them out, fold them in half long ways, so they were like a long strip, and then I picked the side that I liked better when I folded it up. I wanted it to look cool on both sides in case I decided to make these floating pockets, and rounded the corners and inked the edges and sewed. First I sewed this, and then I folded it up and sewed it down. So it was a two-step sewing process for these. But I have a variety of different colors. This book has, I think it's these three colors that alternate. There may be a purple also, but I didn't use that. Very 70s colors though, for sure. This you will all recognize. This is the first page of sewing pattern instructions. And because the journals I'm making are 9 by 12, they're pretty tall. This would be an okay size for a tuck spot. So I'll be gluing this to the edge of a page. Maybe it's a blank white page or a page with lots of text on it. And it will just be a place for you to tuck things down. It's almost as big enough to be called like an envelope or something. It's just so tall, but I love that. This is something that I kind of had in my brain for several weeks, but finally got around to doing it. This is, let's see if y'all can guess what this is. If you guessed bias tape, then you are correct. This is bias tape, and it is a variety of decades, a variety of types, like the single fold and the double fold, all the same width though. I did have some bigger and some smaller, but I only used the standard width, and a variety of colors. And what I did is I took a file folder, I cut it in half, and I just started layering with glue stick, strips alternating, slightly overlapping each other, but not much. If I could make them butt against each other, I did that, but sometimes there was a gap and I just couldn't, like even when I sewed, sometimes gaps still appeared because it sort of pulled one away. That's okay though. But I just alternated them, and then I took them to my sewing machine and sewed them like I do frankenpaper, which is where I just go in long rows and use zigzag connecting one to the other. And then after I finished, I was like, well, what am I going to use these for? I thought about pockets, but I was like, oh my goodness, I used probably 7 or 8 whole packages of seam binding just for this one thing, or maybe 3/4 of a package. They were open and lightly used. So I was like, if I make pockets for all these journals. It's gonna, not that I don't have enough bias tape. I keep saying seam binding. Not that I don't have enough bias tape in my collection. It is, I just didn't want to do that. It took a really long time to glue all those down. So I was like, what else could I make that I could use that would still show the colors, but not be quite as big and, you know, only get 3 to a page. And I decided to do belly bands. These could also be side pockets probably, but they'll probably function better as a belly band. Another thing, if I did a pocket, I realized that I would have to do it this way, because sometimes when you do things with the sewing like this, it's really hard to get things in and out of the pockets. But if you go this way, for some reason, it's easier. It's like against the grain of the sewing. But these will be belly bands, and I think they turned out super cute, and the colors match the journals that I'm making. So here is a use for your bias tape, ladies. Use it up. Okay, next, this is what I was just talking about. This is bias tape and seam binding and rickrack, the little wrappers. So whenever I unwrap a new old stock, any of these things, I save the wrapper. I just set it aside. I put it in a little bin. And all I did here is just line them with graph paper. And what I will do is I'll choose the ugliest side, which is on this one, and I'll glue it down into the journal at the corner of a page so you can fold it out and have journaling space. You could also create a tuck spot if you only glued 2 sides, but totally up to you. But these are all, some of these are very old. This one's very old. And this one, because of the way it is, it will have to fold out this way. All right, next, I have some tags made out of sewing pattern tissue. There is nothing fancy about these. These are a dime a dozen. You've seen these everywhere. These are just tags that I glued sewing pattern tissue down, and then I did light collaging and put a sewing pattern lady on the front. And then I put colored dots and different trims. Really fun though. These could easily be, you could probably make 50 of them in a couple of hours if you set your mind to it. The next few things are a little bit, I guess a little bit more off the beaten path. This one is one of those little extra button envelopes that I got at that very old estate sale, and it was crumbling. It was obviously very old. It was already ripped in half like this. So I was like, how can I save this and use both pieces, but still make it into a functional piece? So I decided to glue it as if it were sort of exploding out. And I glued this down. I created the hole for the tag through this original hole. And then this is very delicate, so you'll have to use care with this, but I just put a little journaling page in here. And this is the original string that attached it to the clothing. This is a piece of very thick cardboard that came in a bag of eyelets. And this is very old. This is probably 50s. But it's beautifully patinaed. I didn't want to cover this up. I thought this would be a fun thing to journal on because it's still smooth even though it's cardboard. And then I just sewed some fabric scraps to the top. Here is a tag made from another one of those wrappers. This one is probably 100 years old. It is very old, very, very cute. 1930. Okay, we're not very far away from 100 years. The colors, I'm like, why don't they make them like this now? And it had a hole in it, so it's like a little peekaboo pocket. And I wrapped it around. Look at that old JCPenney. And I did the same thing on the other side. So you have a double pocket tag. Here is sort of a wrapper for lace from Wright's Trim. It is not paper, it's cardstock. So I looked at it and the way it was shaped, and I'm like, if I trim this just a little bit, I can turn this into a matchbook. So I sewed a little half circle down here. And then when you open it up, I sewed some little scraps and you have a little matchbook journaling spot. Really cute. This package was to die for. I had to find a way to use it. It's like hexagonal, and it is for doll clothes. And it came, I don't think anything was in it by the time I got it. It was just this. So I used the knife to get the blister pack off because it was still remaining. And I decided to do a little flip pad that's sewn onto the card. The back, I left it as it was. I didn't want to cover up everything because I wanted it to still look old. And there's no way, even with coffee dyeing, that you can recreate this look because it's authentic and original. So I left that as it was. This is another card for snaps, and it was heavily destroyed. It was just, you know, as you can imagine, it had like 12 holes where snaps were punched out. So all I did was just glue a little pocket onto the front, and I have not put anything in it, but it's a pretty tight pocket because there were holes, and so it's kind of rough, but I thought it was a cute way to put a ticket or something in the front, and then I put some paper on the back. This is the only thing I think in these journals that's childhood themed. Most of the sewing models are ladies, but this one was just, I had to use it because it's the snap fasteners for the little children's PJs. It has an original Kmart price sticker, and she was from a vintage sewing pattern from the 40s. I glued her down, and then I put some vintage calico here. This was a long, flat card that had, like, the bottom of it was this, and the top of it had holes where these little frog closures were attached. So I cut that part off and saved this, trimmed the edges to make a tag, and we have a ready-made tag, and it's very substantial. Here is a zipper adhesive. It is this, I think. It's like Stitch Witch, I think it's called. So I took it out with the knife, and then I just put her here to hide an unsightly spot that had ripped. And then I put some paper on the back for journaling. This was closures. I don't remember what a Bonnie clasp is. It might have been for a belt. So I just put her on there with some paper on the back. Here's another one of those toggle tabs, and I did another pocket here. Slip straps. This had 4 holes where slip straps, here they are right here, were woven through. So it's real bumpy because there was some cardboard poking out, but I used this as an opportunity to do some collaging. So lots of fun stuff on there. This is a little needle book, and I did this kind of like I do my coin wrappers with the secret journaling spot. So this pulls out and you have a place to write, and it just fits right back in the sleeve. This was too tiny for a shaker card, so that's what I decided to do with this one, and it's very old. This one is kind of interesting, but kind of plain. I just wanted to leave this as it was. I may go back and add something, I'm not sure, but it just celebrates how some of the packaging and the different types of decor people used in their marketing back then. This is a very beat up, bent card for snaps, silk covered snaps. I lined the back with colored paper, and then here I did a little teeny tiny flip pad with staples, and it's just notebook paper. This is Snap Fastener again, the Singer brand, and to go with the green theme, I put this piece of paper on top and this little snarky sewing lady and lined it with paper. And last but not least, because we already had a lady on here, I didn't want to put another lady, so I just did a paper and fabric snippet strip and glued that down and put some fun paper on the back. So those are all of the sewing themed notions using ephemera that I have been making this week. A little bit at a time, a little bit every day. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you would like to participate in these are all available for download either in my community tab or in my Ko-fi shop. And I have September, October, and November all available for download, printing, sharing, saving, whatever. And join in. All you have to do is just tag me in your video or Instagram post. My Instagram handle is different, so look, it's in my description box if you want to tag me on Instagram. And then use the hashtag #ReadySetStash, and I'll add your video to the playlist so that everyone else can see what you've done. You guys have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.